Hey everyone, and welcome. I'm Joe Brady, I'm your host today, but today is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to be doing most of the talking because we've got three great guests with us today. So let's get started. We're here to talk about travel, landscape, and nature photography, and we have three guests with us today. From the far side coming back towards me, we've got Andy Williams on the far left, Marc Muench sitting next to him, and my buddy and sad guitar teacher, because he keeps trying, it's just not sinking in, Sammon. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be here and honored to be with you guys. It's going to be a ton of fun.
It is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk a lot about travel, and we've all been doing that lately. In fact, all four of us had invaded the state of Utah just a couple weeks ago.
Right.
And Rick had the hardest time of it. He really had to adapt, and part of getting great photography is being willing to adapt.
Yes, when the national parks are closed.
Yes, Rick was involved in a shutdown. We were all planning on going to Arches and Canyonlands, and Rick had to make Plan B work. So being that kind of flexibility into your whole shooting is going to flow into everything you do, and you guys still had a great time, didn't you?
Yep.
So rather than kind of me introduce you guys, I'm going to let you guys talk about your photography, how it pertains, how your philosophy goes, and whether you're visiting a place once or all the time, I guess some of the points that we've talked about are going to apply. And the first thing, let's start right out with it, is understanding the place you're going to go. What kind of preparation do you guys do? Do you go scout out a location ahead of time? Do you have guides? Do you just show up early before your class, your workshop shows up, or do you wing it? How do you handle it?
Yeah, I think good photos just don't magically happen. You got to get some work done ahead of time. Whether it's a favorite sunset spot on your way home from work, or a particular iconic place in one of our national parks, or maybe you're on safari in Africa, you've really got to plan and get ready. You know, on screen now is a shot from one of our workshops. We just finished it
Let's bring that up.
second version a week ago out in California at a horse ranch. And we had planned for these horses to ride along the ridgeline and be there at sunset so that we could have them backlit by the sun. And in order to get that, we had to first scout the location. We did it that morning. And then we used some of the tools that are available today. We've all got smartphones. And there's some amazing apps that'll tell you exactly, when the sun will rise and set, when the moon will rise and set, and what direction it's going to come from. And you know exactly where you're standing, where the sun's going to be. And in fact, I think, Rick, you just got a brand new app out now, too.
Photo
right?
Sundial.
Photo Sundial by Rick Sammon for your iPhone. You should check that out.
Looks like a good one.
Mark, how about yourself? What is your kind of mindset as you're going into a location?
Well, you definitely want to know as much as you can about the place. And, back before apps, you had to figure out these things.
Do you guys
in your
remember
head.
before
So,
apps?
Those were the days.
Yeah.
But literally, you want to know just kind of the geometry of where you're going to be, where the big subject is going to be, maybe a mountain range or a lake, and if there's the potential for a sunrise shot, or is it just a sunset shot, maybe? Or maybe none of those are possible and you're in a narrow canyon and you need it at high noon. So all those things you want to know about. If you don't, you're going to rely, like Andy was saying, on some of the workshops, we have to rely on local guides to tell us, draw on some of their vast knowledge. They've been there their whole lives.
Sure.
So,
How about you, Rick?
Well, first of all, the guides are the key, but before we came on the air, Andy summed it up. He said he planned a year for a workshop to shoot 3 days. So I find the same thing. I'm sure you find it too. Sometimes it takes a year to plan out a week's shoot. So, I use the internet. I use Stuck on Earth. Stuck on Earth by Trey Ratcliffe? This is like, say I'm planning to go to, Arches National Park. You go to Stuck on Earth, you'll find places around, which is what we did, actually. You find places around there to shoot. So I spend at least a year, setting up my trips. You look on my website, you look at my workshops, 2014 is like just about all set, unless we do something together.
And by the way, so you guys know, when we do our follow-up email, we'll give you the emails, the links to all these guys, so you can find out what they're up to over the next year, and you can join them on a workshop yourself. So all this planning, and then something shows up that you weren't expecting. So how about the opportunities that present themselves? What do you do then? How do you make that happen?
There's a good example, and if you can go back to my slides and maybe fast forward to the anticipation one. I think planning is important, but then anticipating what may happen And if you get, there's a lion shot.
Yeah, coming up right here.
Keep going past that
We'll
one, yeah.
just wait for it to catch
So
up.
we're on safari, and we spent 3-4 hours tracking and following this family of lions, and we were behind this scene, and we watched the mama lion get up and start acting as if she's going to go hunt, and so we got away from where we were and drove opposite this wildebeest so that we could be in position
Right.
for the mama lion to come out and stalk this prey. And, so that's a matter of anticipating what might happen and putting yourself in the best position to get the shot. And for, fortunately, it worked out.
So I guess one of the things, this whole anticipation and the opportunities that present themselves, first thing is you got to make sure that your gear's out of the way.
You have to make sure the gear's out of the way, but as far as anticipation goes, I think knowing animal behavior is very important, right? If like I was photographing bald eagles, that when they're gonna swoop down, what they're gonna do with their claws, what they're gonna do with their wings.
Right.
Understanding the subject, the same thing goes with people. You photograph people, you photograph wildlife. Understanding the subject is just so very, very
And
important.
like we were talking about the analogy to music,
Right.
you got to practice. It's not just going to happen. You got to learn your gear so that when you hit that opportunity, you're ready for it. And you guys mentioned about having your camera set up in the bag or in your hand before you even leave to go to the location.
3-second rule, or in
Yeah,
some
we
cases,
talk
30
about in our
seconds.
workshops the 30-second rule. So a lot of people go out for weekend drives trying to get photographs. Have your camera ready with a good all-purpose zoom, 24 to 105, 24 to 70, and have it on the seat next to you and be ready to get out of that car and take a photo within 30 seconds, because you might have only that much time before the light's gone or the subject's gone. And as we were talking earlier, when you're in Africa, you might only have
3
two
seconds.
or three
3
seconds.
seconds.
So you really got it ready. You got to be ready at all times. I know a lot of you guys are really into gear, so yes, we'll survey everybody as to what they use. And what might surprise you is we're all over the place. We each have different favorite lenses, different camera systems, and it really comes down to
What works for you?
what we
That's
I
right.
always say the best camera is the one that you have with you and
That's right.
it's ready to go with. So when you're anticipating this image, how do you stay focused on what it is you're doing?
I have a couple slides, if you keep going forward, which show one of the that's sort of anticipation there. And that brings up scouting, which I do in the middle of the day. Sometimes you can do it even when the light's good if you have the luxury of enough time. But basically here in Iceland, we went to this waterfall, and we went there just after high noon, and you can walk around behind this waterfall. It's one of the wonders of the world. You've probably seen it,
I've been
Rick.
there, yeah.
And so what happens is when you're walking back around there, you realize, well, maybe the sun's going to go down through the water. And that's exactly what happens. So then we went back out to this place while the sun was setting. So if you're anticipating where the light's going to be, your light will typically get much better. But, if you want to stay focused, the other example I have is, if you keep clicking through there, I have a panorama there, which comes up after a couple slides. And basically, I did an HDR pano, and that's where you're taking 3 shots of each scene in the pano. I think keep going. There it is. And what has to happen in that whole sequence is you're going through a number of camera settings, and then you're moving the camera, and you're never going to see the final result until, I don't know, a good half hour to hour after post-processing. So there you have to really stay focused on camera settings, literally focus, the light changing potentially, all that stuff.
So you really have to pre-visualize. You got to understand what it is you want as your end product.
You have to think about the end result. Like I have this picture up here. I was photographing this mama giraffe.
Yeah,
Want to go to that?
Yeah,
or you
let's,
wanna...
let's bring that up.
Let's bring that up. I mean, this is my favorite shot from our last trip to Kenya.
Great shot, Rick.
Or Kenya.
Yep.
Thank you, as some people say. But I envisioned the end result. So the first shot, if you see, we're driving along in the vehicle. It's thundering, it's lightning, it's raining really hard. I saw these 2 huge rainstorms coming together. Now, if you look at the bottom of this frame, you won't see the pregnant giraffe there, but I saw it. It's just so small in the frame. So we were talking before about making the picture, anticipating, envisioning the end result. I said, I have to get a picture of this giraffe, talking about staying focused.
Right.
I have to get a picture of the giraffe between these 2 between these two storms. So I'm working with the guide. Go faster, go slower, go to the left, go to the right, stop, go back just a little, go back a little. So I'm working with the guide, and you were saying too, the guide is so important. I said, okay, stop, and the giraffe was right going through the two storms. And you can see everything in the scene is in focus here.
Yes.
When I do wildlife, I like to isolate the subject's head from the background. So the head, so our eye is going to go to the animal's eyes. So I isolated the head, again, working with the driver. You see everything in the scene is in focus. I shot this with a 24 to 105 millimeter lens. So you don't have to use
Your favorite lens.
my favorite lens. You don't have to have that 600 millimeter lens sometimes to get the shots. But this is a result of working with the guide and getting me in exactly the position. Because I could have gotten out and run around, but I think I probably would have been eaten by the lions that were around.
And then the giraffe.
So
maybe.
we got a
Or
couple.
kick me.
We got a couple questions come in that actually apply to all three of you guys, and this is going to be a preference thing. But for your wildlife nature photography, what do you prefer? Do you prefer full manual, aperture, shutter priority, something else?
I shoot most everything in manual, but I've switched over to aperture once in a while, and sometimes for air views I'll do shutter priority, but oftentimes I'm in manual.
Okay.
We teach manual in our workshops, because I think everybody's got to understand that first. But I'm a big fan of letting the camera do some of the work, and so I really like to control the depth of field. And once you've worked enough and you know what change in your aperture is going to do to the shutter speed, you can shoot wildlife in aperture mode, and I like to do that. I like to be wide open, let the camera make the shutter speed decision, and I'll move the ISO as I need to make sure I get the fast enough
How about
shutter
you, Rick?
speed.
Yeah, on my workshops page, it says you must know how to shoot on manual. However, I shoot most of my pictures, including this one of the giraffe, on the aperture priority mode. Now, our friend Hal Schmidt says, good friends don't let their friends shoot on any of the automatic modes.
Right.
So yes, I teach manual like you guys, but like Andy, I want to get the shot. I don't want to be, manual, I have to do this and that. I have my thumb when I'm shooting on that wheel on the back of the 5D Mark III. And I'm fine-tuning the exposure, and that's what we're talking about with your color monkey displays and everything else. We're fine-tuning our exposure because for you, this may not be the right exposure. You may like it a little darker, a little lighter. It's a very personal thing.
And that is, again, something more specific, I would think, for wildlife photography, or maybe you don't want the foreground or the background in focus. But if
Sure.
we're talking about landscape photography, then in general, you want everything in focus. So you're probably going to want to either go aperture or take more manual control. So I
definitely.
guess the consensus was that everybody prefers manual, but they don't always stay there. Is that a fair thing to say?
That's fair to say.
I don't practice what I preach, so.
And then I know Rick has you've been to Iceland recently. Have you guys?
We were
have also
just
been
there, yep, back in September.
So somebody asked about shooting in Antarctica, which I'm going to guess is somewhat similar to shooting in Iceland, same
Pretty
kind of
close.
conditions. So what did you find peculiar or specific about shooting there that might have created a different set of problems?
In Antarctica?
Well, or in Iceland, the same kind of.
Well, it actually was. We went to Antarctica in December, which is their summer. So actually, I was in a T-shirt some days on the front of on the bow of the ship.
Cold wasn't that big a
It
deal.
wasn't that big a deal, but I was prepared. I think the main thing there is when you're shooting in the cold, gloves, right?
Gloves, keeping
are
your
helpful.
extra batteries on your
Yeah.
body in your pocket and make sure they're not going to get too frozen.
Yeah, you don't want your batteries to freeze.
And then especially the biggest thing that people make the mistake on is if there is a lot of snow. So if you're down in Antarctica and you got all this whiteness, the camera's going to get fooled. The camera meter is going to think it's just a big old gray card. And so you've got to learn to be smarter than the camera there and overexpose for that type of situation.
And for those of you, the guys that have watched before, you guys know how much I preach on spot metering with my Sekonic 758 and then compensating for that. So another way. Let's get a couple more questions in. We just had this discussion ourselves last week. In national parks, do you bother with permits and when are they necessary?
Oh my gosh.
And these guys
Well,
do.
if you're there on your own, you don't need
Yeah.
a permit. If
But
you're
if you're-
just on your own, you don't need a permit.
If you're going on a workshop, you better make sure that the workshop leaders have the permit. A good friend of ours actually got pinched a while back. It wasn't pretty. Ever since we've been doing this since 2007, we've always had permits in the parks because it's a commercial venture and you have to have what's called a commercial use authorization.
Yes, no, and there's a way around that.
Well, we got permits when we did this trip to the national parks. We were going to shoot in Arches, Zion, and Bryce. So Susan, my wife, gets all the permits. What are they? $500 a piece. There's
I think
some,
they're 100, 150.
Couple hundred.
maybe all of them were that.
Yeah.
Anyway, the parks were closed.
Right.
And we thought, okay, the money's lost. We're talking to the parks people. They're refunding our permit money because we didn't get to do it. But yeah, you do not want to be caught without a permit. We've never been asked for the permit, but we always have it. And to get the permit, you have to have someone who knows CPR, I guess.
You gotta have
your
first
first
aid
aid
and
And you got
CPR
to, what is it, $1 million you have to
and an
have?
insurance policy.
Right.
Now, if you're just going yourself and you're gonna shoot, have at it. If you're going with a couple of friends,
Well, one of
Have
the things
at it.
that comes up though is if, you know, one of the reasons they want you to have a permit is so that you don't go walking off onto very endemic species and plants
Right,
and
right.
kill them. So to some degree, you really have to educate yourself, be prepared where you're going. So actually, as an individual, you don't get yourself into big trouble also, because you can do that, even though you don't have.
And
a
it's
permit.
good practice for everybody, not just groups like ours, but everybody to practice leave no trace.
for sure. Yes, leave no trace. In fact, make it better than when you arrived. If you happen to see something, pick it up and take it out with you. Let's change gears just a little bit. And these guys have some more slides they're gonna show you. We'll jump back into that in a second. But let's talk about kind of the process from the beginning. And we're sponsored today by X-Rite, and obviously color is a big part of that. And part of it is visualizing what our final product is gonna be. If we're gonna go to print, we're gonna go onto screen on a show there, we want it to be as good as it can be. So what tools do you guys need to make sure that color is not getting in the way?
I've used X-Rite products for years, and this is one of them, the color checker, Passport. It's
Yeah,
very
let me
simple.
hold that a second, I'll hold it up so.
It does two things, as you know, Joe. You know, it
Yeah.
creates a profile for your camera,
Color
and
check
then it has a
passport.
white balance setting as well, which is very
Yes.
handy.
White balance? Yes.
And it's super simple. You know, once you do the profile, it's imported into Lightroom automatically. I don't even think about it anymore.
Best 99 bucks you can spend as far as getting your color in the best place. In fact, we're gonna be doing, if you're interested in this stuff in detail, over the next few weeks, we're gonna be doing some detailed programs where I'm gonna really delve into the step-by-step of the color checker and monitor calibration and printer calibration. Today is gonna be more of kind of the end result rather than
Right.
getting there. So if you're interested in the details, stay tuned, we'll get into that. But Jen, if you would just show my screen for 1 second. I'm just gonna pull this up as an example. This is a shot from, even though it's an arch, this happens to be in Canyonlands National Park. And I want to show you under camera calibration. If you don't have a custom profile, you'll see this thing that says Adobe Standard. And one of the things you have a tendency to lose when you do this is you lose some of the saturation of the blues and greens for some reason under this profile. So I created a profile for my camera. Here you see the Alpha 99, my Sony. Now take a look at the sky in particular when I apply the new profile, and you can see the color pops. And if you look at the orange glow under the arch, I'll drop back again, you'll see it picks up a little bit of intensity there. Now, you might think this is a subtle change, but this is putting you at the best starting place you can be, so that when you then go to add your own personal flavors to the image, your own stamp as far as color reproduction, you're at least starting from the best place you can be.
Yeah, the other thing is, say you have two cameras, right, and you're trying to tell a story. You have the wide view and you have the telephoto view. The colors, you know, it's not going to be the same between the two cameras, right?
Right.
They could be made, you know, 6 months later or whatever. So if you're shooting with more than one camera, it's important
Makes
to
a big
use
difference.
the Passport color checker to calibrate your camera. So if you're doing a slideshow, the color is not, you know, going
Yeah,
back and forth.
That's a really good point. One of the things a color checker will do, since, like, say we were all shooting together, and, well, we all use different cameras. You guys know I'm a Sony shooter. Rick,
Canon.
it's a Canon Explorer Lite. Mark,
Nikon, Olympus, and
Mark's all over the
Panasonic.
place. And Andy has gone a completely different direction, which we're going to hear a lot more about over the next couple of months. Andy, you switched over to the mirrorless system.
Panasonic mirrorless.
So completely different camera systems all over the place. And where that could become crazy is if we tried to do some kind of book or slideshow together,
Right.
trying to get the color response. All the cameras have their own idea as to what, like, say, red is, or even gray for that matter. So by having a color checker, if you had a profile for each of your cameras, since they all have the same colors as a reference, they're all have the same starting point. They have the same, if you ever noticed, red, green, blue, CMYK are right on the bottom rows. So they all have that same reference. So this all comes down to getting the gear out of the way. We're getting the color out of the way so you don't have to worry about it. So next, preparing for the trip. why don't we go ahead and take a look at
I
some
was
of your
gonna
slides?
just throw that at, one thing before you leave that note
Yeah.
is also profile a monitor, because then you
Yes.
have an idea of what those colors, how they're represented, how they actually appear.
We'll get
That's
back
really
into
important,
that.
so-
Mark brings up a
Go
really good point. Before you do any editing,
Yep,
you definitely have to have your monitor profiled. But let's go back out into the field, and then we'll come back to the editing part. So why don't you take us through, Andy, I believe you're first?
you have
Sure.
some
on
shots
these?
there.
So why don't you take us through,
Okay.
starting here, and let's take a look at some of your images. So let's go to my screen.
So,
There'll be a little time lag, so
Okay.
don't worry about it.
I just think, most great photos just don't happen. We talked about the horse shot on the ridge line and the prep work that we did in advance of that. It can be as simple as using the internet to look up the sunset and sunrise time. Just Google it, it's your friend. But really, what's more fun these days is to use an app. Rick's got an app. There's an app that Mark likes called Photo Pills, and I've been using the Photographer's Ephemeris, which has been around for a while, and it just really helps you to get exactly at the right time and in the right position.
So what would be helpful for us, if you guys can give us the list of those things that you use, when we send our email out to
Yeah.
everybody, we'll give them the list so that you can have that available.
We'll do that. There's actually something that I just learned last week, which is really cool. It's a weather app called Forecast.io, and it's an app for iPhone, and it works on your browser on your Android, and it'll give you the weather like up to the minute changes in the location that you're at, and it's
cool. Amazing,
It's
yeah.
uncannily accurate.
Okay, I hope it's better than what I've been using, because when we were out west just last week, 2 days ahead, it was never right. It was wrong.
Well, this will
every
tell you
single
it's
day.
going to be raining or showering or drizzling for the next 10 or 15 minutes.
And then
Oh, okay.
magically in
So
10
really?
minutes it stops.
pretty amazing.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Wow.
pretty cool. So we talked a lot about the importance of scouting ahead of time and knowing exactly where to shoot from. And then Rick interjected about practice. And one of the things before a workshop, people might call and say, I'm a little nervous about, shooting the moon or shooting the stars that you talk about. Go in your backyard.
Yeah.
Set your tripod up on your back deck and practice with some junk shots of the treetops and the stars. This way you'll get to know your camera settings, you'll see what the result is, and when you get out to that once a year or once in a lifetime kind of trip, you're gonna be much, much better prepared. Speaking of preparation.
Yes.
Preparation. So I'll add to what Andy was saying. Basically, one of the things that I love to photograph is the high mountain environment. And so I like to get out there where a lot of people don't go. That's why I picked this picture. And one of the things that comes up often in scenarios like this is you've got to be over prepared, basically mentally and physically. So if you're going to go on a strenuous hike, you really want to be able to do that hike 3 times in one day, because then you will have the ability to concentrate on the pictures. If you get
Yeah,
up there
that's
and you're wiped out, last thing you want to do is get the camera out and start working. And I've done that, so I know.
That's something else in the whole
Personal
preparation
experience.
phase. You guys just did a workshop, as did I, and we had people coming from the East Coast who are used to
Yep.
sea level.
Right.
And then what happens, we go to Arches and it's 7,500 feet.
You're out of breath.
And
Just
they walk up
walking
a
down the
slight
street.
incline and everybody's stopping alongside the path trying to catch their breath. So
Yeah.
you need to build that into your preparation, the physical location.
Which also makes it such a great activity.
That's-
Landscape photography is just one of the best hobbies. I happen to think it's the best profession,
For sure.
but
keep-
it is definitely draining if you're not prepared for
It
it
can keep you in
physically.
shape, right?
Keeps
I
you
wrote
in
an
shape.
article once, I forget where it was, but it's called The Photographer's Diet. Right? You walk around with the backpack, you hike, you do this and that,
Yeah.
right? It's good.
And they always say at altitude, you have to get in more calories, so everybody was hoping to lose weight when they were marching around Arches. Hey, do any of you guys use the auto ISO that's available on some cameras?
I don't, but I know some people who shoot birds, changing like
Yeah.
from the sky to the shadows, like the bald eagles up in Alaska we were doing. Some people are doing that, but I always want to know what ISO I'm shooting.
It's a good example of a technology that's really coming to the aid of today's photographer. And we do teach it. I don't personally, when I'm out shooting landscape on a tripod, I don't, of course
Yeah.
you don't need it. But if you're out, let's say, working in a city, or you're out in the woods where you're going from deep dark woods to bright clearing, it's a great tool to use, because there's nothing worse than coming back and looking at images that were shot at 1/30th of a second when you really should have been at 1/250th. So the auto ISO is a great tool if you're out, like I said, taking a hike from 10 a.m. until
Yeah.
2 p.m. while you're waiting for the good light, and you're in that changing, just like
Yeah.
a bird shooter.
But I would agree with you, Rick. I kind of want to know about it.
Yeah.
So if you know ISO and no manual, then you can take advantage of the
Right.
auto ISO, right?
Right.
It's like aperture priority.
We
It's kinda
won't-
using that intelligence.
Yeah, we won't let people or teach that until they've fully mastered the manual part.
Do you have a cutoff? This is the highest ISO,
I think it de-
with the exception of star shots. Is
Yeah,
there a cutoff?
it depends on the camera you're using, but today's cameras, the full frame Canon and Nikons and Sonys, even the crop sensor bodies, the newer models, ISO 3200 is like butter. ISO 64 in certain cases, 6400,
Yeah.
beautiful.
What's
So
go ahead.
I think it depends is the
Yeah,
answer.
With
The answer
noise-
is it depends.
With the noise reduction features we have in Lightroom and Photoshop, Adobe Camera
Yeah.
Raw,
Oh, yeah.
and Aperture, Noise Ninja, we
Right.
can go through the list, Topaz to Noise, Nictify.
The real answer, I think, it depends, is have the ISO be as high as you're willing to allow it to get a good print.
So you need to learn your camera again. It depends how
Right.
big your print's gonna be. I'm actually gonna separate myself out for the group on here. And me personally, I rarely go over 100 ISO. I will go to 400 on if I have to handhold. And then my next step is going up to 2400 or 3200 for
Right.
the night shots.
stuff.
But I'm not a wildlife shooter.
I think
There's a
that's
difference
the,
between wildlife and landscape.
that's the good example. It's walking through the woods, or it's shooting birds, or moving wildlife, and the light conditions are gonna change. You really, shutter speed
What will you
becomes
accept?
Shutter speed becomes
Yes.
very, very
Yeah.
important, and the best way to let people have as much fun as they can
Right.
is that auto ISO.
Okay. Do any of you guys actually carry around reflectors?
Well, I do, because I'm big on people photography. I tell people, as you know, my specialty is not specializing, but I love photographing people the most, so. But you could also use the reflector for waterfalls. If you're doing a detailed
yeah.
shot of a waterfall, a reflector can be a really cool accessory, so can a diffuser.
Okay, that's a good question. So somebody asked a color checker question. The whole thing about the color checker, just to be clear, when you create a profile for your camera, it's going to adjust for the spectrum of the light. So if you shoot a daylight shot with your camera and it's noon and you create a profile for it, you're done. You don't have to create it again. What's going to change through the day is the white balance. So take a reference if you want. Me personally, once I do daylight, I stay there. You can then adjust the flavor later. If you encounter weird light, like if it is moonlight or if it's reflected light or you're in shade and there's green coming up
Right.
off the grass, then maybe you want to create another profile, or if you're under tungsten or fluorescent lights. But you don't have to keep creating a profile for your camera. Create one for each light source, sun, cloud, tungsten, fluorescent, and then adjust the white balance to flavor. You don't have to keep doing that.
So I was going to say, did you notice the bottom of the clouds? A lot of times I'll use cloud for white balance. But out in Moab, this happens in the Caribbean as well, the bottom of the clouds is actually reflecting the red rock. So don't set a white balance on a cloud in the Southwest.
Good tip.
Good tip.
There's a
So
tip.
there you go. No white balancing off of clouds in the southwest. When you're white balancing off of something, you're asking your eye to judge what's neutral, which it's not very good at. Which actually comes over to a slightly different point. Do any of you guys kind of think zone system in your digital photography? Anybody? Because a couple people asked us, they used to use
I
film.
just remember the old days when you'd push and pull film.
Right.
Negative black and white film. And so you'd overexpose the scene and underdevelop it and vice versa. So all you do with digital is basically take one file or 3 or 5 for HDR. So
Okay.
it's similar but different.
And now with, like Mark said, you can use a single raw file from a modern camera, and you can pull so much detail out of the shadows, and you can hold the highlights. You can develop it multiple times and then blend them together. Or, as we've all been doing lately, you can put your camera in burst mode and do HDR.
I'm finding more and more people are doing EDR, extended dynamic range, because you can pull so much
Sure.
out of that
Right.
file. Most of my friends, unless it's really high contrast, like the scene that I was talking about before over in Wales.
Yeah.
Unless
We'll
it's
bring that up in a
really,
second.
unless it's really high contrast, EDR. Again,
Okay.
but we're envisioning the end result, not only the composition, and
Right.
we're envisioning, okay, how much can we pull out? We know if we're more than a stop overexposed, we may not be able to get that back in Photoshop, Lightroom, and Aperture, no matter how skilled we are.
Yeah, it's
shot.
interesting. We all follow waves of the way we like to approach
Right.
things. And I'm sure you guys have gone back to images you shot 10 years ago. and are processing them completely different ways to get different results because the software has changed. I find myself shooting much less than I used to. I'm much more thoughtful, and I'm more concerned about composition than I was in the past. In fact, I've almost abandoned HDR unless my meter tells me absolutely have to have it. Do you guys find you're doing the same thing?
Well, I can tell you, I love the comment you just made. I'm going back to images I made 10 years ago, and I'm not only processing them differently, but I'm also sometimes I'm saying, damn, I wish I had the camera I have today to shoot that shot. I do a lot of bracketing for HDR because it's so simple, number one. Memory cards are cheap, and I want to have as much possible data as I can. What I'm finding, though, that's very interesting is many times as I bracket for HDR, the shot that's perfectly exposed is just enough of what I need, and then I can do like what Rick's saying, the extended dynamic range,
So
which is
let's clarify that, because I'm sure that's going to confuse people when you talk about extended dynamic range.
EDR.
What's the process?
Well, it's just a term that I came up with, you know, with my
Rick has his own
Sammonism. It's a
dictionary.
Sammonism. It's,
Yes.
actually, I have a blog post, we'll have a link to it.
Yeah, okay.
It says goodbye HDR, hello EDR.
Okay.
So it's just my term, it's just my way of pointing out that there's so much that we can pull out of that single raw file, which is why we want to shoot RAWs. We can pull out much less from the JPEGs.
I think,
So-
and Mark and I have been teaching that since the beginning.
Right. It's not a new
You
term.
know,
There's
back
a lot
before
in there.
HDR was popular, we were taking a single RAW and developing it two or three times, and then, you know, in Photoshop using layers and masking
Yeah.
to bring the best of that image together. HDR has made it possible now with the programs that are out there by Nick and Photomatics and others, just to, you know, push a button and you get, the same result or better.
Well, it's about speed, and we were talking about that with the color check. It saves you time. You know, with the HDR programs, it saves you time over doing it the layers. And as far as plugins go, every plugin that's out there, you could do the same thing in Photoshop. If you know how to do it, it might take you an hour.
Right.
Right? So it's just, you know, they're all time savers.
Rick, let's take a look at a couple of your images. You had this trip to Wales where you got some astounding stuff. Let's talk about this one first.
Okay, this is my favorite picture from Wales. Susan and I were over there last week. I have to tell you this. Actually, before I tell you this, I'll tell you an Ansel Adams story. I was working with John Sexton, one of Ansel Adams' assistants. And he tells us someone writes Ansel Adams a letter saying, Mr. Adams, I have your books, I have your posters. I went to Yosemite. And he's really mad. He says, it didn't look like that. So, because it does, because Ansel Adams he was the first HDR photographer. So if you look at this scene, this is not really how the scene looked. This is the middle shot from an HDR shot. At first I thought the starburst would look good, but I figured, you know, I have too many starburst pictures. So I shot 6 pictures, and I created an HDR image, and then I used in Nik Color Effects Pro, I used what's called the duplex filter. And the duplex filter adds a softness to it. I wanted to create very fairy tale. Very fairy tale look. So and this is actually called Fairy Glen. But talk about envisioning the end result. I wanted to get this beautiful blurred water. So I knew I had to have a neutral density filter, 2 to 8 stop Tiffin neutral density filter. I knew that I wanted to have great sense of depth. So I'm placing these elements in the foreground, and this picture would not have been possible without a good guide. Guides are so important. He says to our group, you have to be there at 10 o'clock because the light comes streaming in at 10 o'clock and it's gone by 10:30. So it's a result of a team effort, making the picture and seeing the end result, and that comes from, you know, this scene, which is kind of like a blah, you know, here's the original shot again. It's kind of like a bland shot.
So it comes down to something, again, that you've talked about before, and as well of you guys, that your job isn't to just do the mechanical act of taking a picture. You want to make one. You want
Make
to
the
create
picture.
something that says something that influenced you. So what is your process? What is your thought process for that?
You want to start?
No, you go ahead.
Well, it goes from, occasionally it's like you get pictures while you're there and you're driving by. They're drive-bys because you never could have envisioned that scene that way. So of course there's that.
Sure.
But what you do, or what I do before I go to a location is I have an idea of where certain subject matter is going to be, and then I know if I get there and I spend some time scouting, I'm going to find the photography that I want or the scene that I want. So I don't have the exact shot in mind. I have a rough idea that, like your shot here, Rick, you know, there's a canyon and I want this light to glow. So
Right.
I've got to be there at a certain time, and all those types of details come into play. But in essence, I want to get into the ballpark. And once I'm there, then I'm going to use my own ability and creative juices to go around and find the compositions within that area. So that happens quite often. When I was shooting books and state landscape books, that would be the scenario where I was the director. If you're on a shoot, a commercial shoot, and you've got an art director telling you what to shoot, it's a little different.
Andy, how about you?
Well, to kind of tack on to what Mark has been saying, get in there, get in the ballpark so that we can use our creative juices. In order to be able to do that, you've got to be kind of free of all the encumbrances, which we as workshop leaders see all the time. Rick, I bet you that you see the same thing we do, which is folks showing up with 1, 2, 3 bags full of 20 lenses and all these different gear items, and before you know it, they're just clogged up with so much gear. They look in their bag and they don't know what to shoot with. And in the meantime, others who have less gear, and we as instructors, have already gone out and gotten the shot, and they're sort of still fumbling there. So I've been teaching my practice of being light, nimble, and quick. If you have just the right amount of gear, and it doesn't matter whether it's Sony, Canon, Nikon, Panasonic, Olympus, it just doesn't matter, but have the right combination of just the right amount of gear and get out there into the ballpark so that you can then compose, use your creative juices, and be free of, oh my gosh,
Which lens?
Yeah, which lens, and I have so much stuff in my bag, I can't find the neutral density filter that I need.
So we had this discussion earlier, so people like to hear about gear. So let's go down the list.
Sure.
You get one camera, you get one lens. What are you gonna have?
Of what
in
I
your hand?
currently
What are you
have?
gonna- What are you gonna have in your hand?
Yeah, it would be my Panasonic GH3 and a 24 millimeter f2 prime lens.
Okay, Mark?
Well, I came up with 2 lenses, so can I,
All right, we'll
can I
let
go
Mark
that
have,
far?
we'll let Mark have 2 lenses. He traveled the greatest distance to be
yeah.
there, so we'll cut him some
That's
slack.
right, I flew the furthest. A Nikon D800, and I have a 28-300, which is, like I was saying earlier, it's technically challenged.
Say why, because a lot of people are confused
Well, it has
about
bad
those
barrel
lenses.
distortion, the chromatics in the corners are horrible, and, it doesn't have the fastest autofocus in the barn. But it gives you a very fun range. I can be more creative with one lens, just zooming in and out.
Okay.
So the antithesis of that is my 18 Zeiss, which is extremely sharp, fixed focal length. I just love the compositions I get with that 18 millimeter range. So
Rick?
Canon 5D Mark III, and if only one lens, it would be the 24 to 105, but I like the 17 to 40. How about you?
rubbed off.
Hey, I find it interesting these guys have all gone wide, because for me, I've focused on mid to slight telephoto. So for me, it's my Sony Alpha 99 with, I have a Sony Zeiss 24 to 70. And for me, that gives me the best balance of going wide when I need foreground elements, but giving me a little bit of telephoto so that if I have mountains, they're not going to go shrink on me too much. So I guess it's what the scene, we all have more than one lens, so.
Right.
But if I had to live with one, that would be it. A couple of people have asked this question, so it's a little bit off, kind of back to where we were, but specifically about Iceland. Some people mentioned that their Icelandic air is very difficult about carry-on stuff.
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay.
No, I didn't find that.
Okay.
In fact, I brought a very big Gura Gear Bataflay bag, fully loaded with way too much stuff, but we bring extra things on the workshops. No, never had any trouble on Icelandic air.
Okay. A couple of people are also asking, going about white balance again. I'm personally against auto white balance. Do any of you guys use auto white balance?
I have some slides here if you want to bring it
Yeah,
up.
let me
Just
bring
as far
that
as
up.
yes, I do use auto white balance to answer your question, but occasionally now, especially with shooting video,
Video and
trucking.
time lapse.
With video, you have to take a white balance, and here it is. It's
Okay, so let's bring this up.
so I kind of go through, some of the reasons for color, and I talk about the fact that some images, color isn't that important. It's secondary to the mood and what's going on in the subject matter. And then the second image,
Yeah, it's on my screen. Go ahead, let's look at my screen for a sec, okay. So is color here important?
not as important.
Okay. But-
And here, you've got the sunset clouds. You really want to get those close to reality so that it doesn't look like something on Mars.
Okay,
And that's where I would use, everything I have in my tool belt to make sure the colors are right and
okay.
accurate.
Rick, you?
The only time I use auto white balance is if I'm shooting like in a kitchen, where there's a mixed source of lights, fluorescent, tungsten, and daylight. If you're shooting a panorama, the last thing you want to do is
That's
set
a good
on
point,
auto white balance, because if you do it and you're set on auto exposure and auto ISO, you put together this beautiful panorama like these guys take, and you're going to have these strange bands in the sky. So when you're doing the panorama, manual.
Panos and time lapse, it's good
Yeah.
to set your white
Andy, how
balance.
about you?
Auto white balance, if I'm doing a single shot on a tripod, I just don't worry about it. In the field, I'll worry about it, in Lightroom.
Okay.
But like Rick, when I shoot panoramas or doing a time lapse, especially during the day, we'll set it,
Yeah.
set it so it won't change.
Okay.
I
Well,
do have, the next slide, I was gonna just say that
Yeah.
there is one point you can get in trouble.
let's take a look at this one.
In auto white balance, it's where, if you don't look at a histogram, occasionally you can blow out one of the channels, like the blue
Right.
channel during a shot like this in the
Mhm.
evening. So, yes, I use auto white balance, but there are a couple scenarios where you might want to set a manual white balance or look at your histogram so you know you're not blowing out the blue channel.
Okay. All good points, and again, we all have different points of view in it. To me, I avoid auto white balance like the plague, because I never know if I'm gonna, at the last minute, wanna create a pano stitch out of a shot, out of a scene, and decide I wanna get a
Right.
couple of shots either side. To me, also, auto white balance is a problem in the shade, because if there's a lot of reflective colors, like we were all in Red Rocks recently, where the camera's gonna see that and try to white balance off that, it's gonna get confused. So for me, I prefer to pick a preset, shade or sunny or whatever works. Yes, you can adjust it after the fact, but when you're doing that preview to that histogram, to your point, the preview and histogram you're looking at are a JPEG that's processed with the camera settings. So if your white balance is really off, you might have a channel clip that isn't really clipping.
Right.
So that's, it's a personal thing, and it's just the way you guys want to work. So we've got our great captures. You've come back and you want to make those adjustments. You want to turn this raw capture into what you pre-visualized the end result's going to be. What do you have to do to make that happen? I know Rick, I know you calibrate your monitor.
Well, I calibrated because you came up to my house about 5 years ago with the color monkey, and after we
Here it is.
calibrated,
It's the same
right.
one.
This is this is a collector's item now. This is exactly the same one that Joe used. But seriously, my monitor looks so different. So we not only calibrated my monitor, we calibrated my printer, and we calibrated my projector.
Yes.
And we're also talking about before your color versus true color, and what do you
Yes.
want? And you could use that for either.
Yes.
So this Glen shot, this fairy Glen shot you showed before, this Iceland shot that we have
Yeah,
up here.
let's bring this one up.
Yeah, this Aurora Borealis. This is not how it looked.
Yeah.
Right? I used a detail extractor in it
Sure.
to get some of the color in there. I increased the saturation. Usually I just use vibrance, but I wanted to saturate the whole thing. So here's, actually it's the next one that's going to come up. You can see how flat this picture, that's how it looked to our eyes. Yet we're out there saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're seeing the Aurora Borealis.
Hey, Rick,
Yeah.
there were some people on our trip that actually did not see it and didn't notice it until they got back on the
On the cameras, right, because the cameras are more
Cameras saw
sensitive. The cameras saw it, you're right, and we
And it was
didn't.
amazing.
So here, when you're doing this night photography,
Yeah.
the camera is seeing things that you can't see.
Right,
Where when you're doing day photography, you're seeing things that the camera can't
Right.
capture. Or it captures wrong because it only has one color temperature, it only has one contrast curve where your eyes adapt depending on where you're looking.
but it's
So
amazing.
back to color.
It's
Let's talk about this.
amazing that I was able to create this image, right? Anyone, actually everyone on the workshop created similar images from this image. If you look at the bottom, the clouds are in the same place. It's the exact same file, just cropped a little differently. So
Yes.
again, I'm envisioning the end result, and that's what we have to do.
So the monitor calibration is important because before you start moving these sliders around in either Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, if this thing isn't showing you what's actually in the
Right.
file, then you're just guessing. You're throwing sliders around and you're adjusting your screen, not the actual file. And if you do, then what happens when you go to print?
It looks some other way.
It's going to be a complete crapshoot.
And he put that
point.
mildly, I think.
Yeah, that was a nice way of saying it. Rick, you have an interesting printed piece here, so I'm gonna guess you had to do some keeping your color in place to make this
Yes,
happen.
so we're talking about fun color, creating
Yes.
our own color, creating artistic images. However, a few years ago, I worked on this book called Flying Flowers, just have the cover here,
Yeah, let me
because
hold
it's
that up.
lighter to carry around. But I'm working with the top 3 butterfly expert scientists in the country. They were not interested in fun color. Rick, we don't care about fun color. We want accurate color of all the butterflies. So again, calibration using the passport, a device like the Passport color checker or the Color Monkey display, let me get the best possible in-camera picture. So I made the scientists happy.
So what we're all agreeing to is that calibration is important. We've got the Passport for capturing up front. We've got our monitors calibrated. Rick, I know you do a lot of your own printing. You've got the printer calibrated. But that doesn't mean that you can't then, like you said, put your own imprint on the color.
Right.
We want to create an image that kind of reflects the way the scene felt to us. And maybe sometimes that'll be a little hyper-real. A couple of folks in our chat room mentioned they were film shooters. Any of you guys still shoot film, by the way?
Not shooting any
have-
film.
No, nobody's shooting film.
I have
Well,
some in the freezer, but
Yeah.
But when you did, you used a certain film because you liked the color response. And it wasn't completely neutral. All the films
Right.
had some super
Yeah.
vibrance to them, especially if you were a slide film shooter. If
Right.
you shot Velvia or a Kodachrome, it was super real, but that's what we got used to. And that's the feeling that the scene evokes. And like if you put on a pair of Polaroid sunglasses, same kind of thing. It's a little hyper real, but that's what we want to see.
And we used to use warming filters, right? That was
warming
always
filter.
Warming
that was,
filters
warming
plus-
polarizing
Right.
filters. Remember how cool those were?
They sold, cool down filters.
Cool down
Nobody
filters,
ever
cool.
bought those.
Yeah. So all the filter stuff, color-wise anyway, you can do in software.
Sure.
But a couple of you mentioned ND filters.
Can't do the ND and you can't do the polarizing.
Right.
So you do neutral density and polarizing. You
Right.
can't do that really post.
In fact, that's the only
Yeah,
filters
it's
we
hard to
really
do.
carry is neutral
Same here.
density and polarizer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, keep it in the whole notion of being light, nimble, and quick. I've got polarizer that fits all my lenses, and then stepping rings to adjust, and I've got neutral density that fits all my lenses.
Yeah, that's what everybody said. If you have a bunch of different lenses with different diameters on them,
Step up
get
rings
the
are
big
great.
lens, get the big filter, and buy step-down rings for that,
Right.
so that your one filter will fit all your camera lenses.
And get good filters. Invest in the money for top quality filters, and then the stepping rings are only a few bucks a piece.
Yeah. All right, let's see. How do you guys feel about, a couple of you mentioned primes versus zooms. At what point is it a problem? You mentioned the problem with the 18 to 300,
28.
28 to 300, and you also use a prime. Rick, do you
Yeah.
focus on one
Well,
or the other?
Andy's always kidding me about my age. So I've been shooting longer than these guys. And back when I started shooting in the 60s with zoom lenses were not that sharp.
Right.
Nobody, no serious photographer would use a zoom lens. Now today, even my 100 to 400 Canon,
Super
it
sharp.
may not be the sharpest lens in the world, but again, if we think about sharpening our pictures using selective sharpening, usually we don't have to sharpen the whole thing, right? We
Right.
just want to sharpen select areas. It becomes like a moot point. Okay, it's a little soft in the edges. Okay, you can sharpen it up, right?
We used to add filters to our files to
Right.
make it soft in the corners.
There are purists for everything, and primes are usually going to win out over zooms, but we don't always have the luxury of carrying all the primes or the money, and it's anti that whole light, nimble, and quick thing
Yeah.
and the 30-second rule.
Right.
Today, the 24-105 Canon that you love is an amazingly sharp lens.
Yeah, that is.
Okay, the 70 to 200 in Canon and Nikon land are super sharp. 24-70 and all the different
Yeah.
brands really sharp. I'm using some zooms with the mirrorless system. They're rather expensive, but they are worth
Yeah.
it. They're incredibly sharp,
Make a difference.
and I don't have to carry 5 different lenses. I do have a couple of primes, but mostly for night work because they're super fast.
Okay, so there you have, the answer is that primes are nice,
Depends.
but actually,
depends.
I would say the exception is that the 24 to 70s, the 70 to 200s, those kind of mid-range zooms have gotten to the point where they can compete with the primes as far as
They're very
sharpness
sharp.
to
Oh, the
their
24.
They can, but then again, look, the 17 to 40 and the 16-35 Canons and the 17 to 35 Nikons, they are sharp.
They are sharp.
good. Don't use them at either extreme. Just move them a little bit off zoom, so shoot at 18 millimeters or 19. And on a landscape, on a tripod, you're going to be at f8, f11, wherever. It's going to be sharp. And so it's fine, use a
Yeah.
prime if you can, but not at the expense of getting the shot.
And that's a
honestly.
great point, because a lot of times I see people using their prime lenses, or even a soft lens that they don't think is that sharp, at f22 or 32, when they shouldn't be, because they don't need that much depth of
Right.
field. They're shooting at infinity, it's always 2 stops down, right, Rick?
Yep.
That's the sharpest point on almost every lens I've ever
Actually, that's a
tested.
good point. If you could explain that to the audience in a little more detail.
Yeah, so every lens you buy, whether it's a 2.8, f4, or 5.6, all you have to do is calculate 2 stops down, which is, if it's a 2.8 lens, you're going to be going from 2.8 to f4 to 5.6. So 5.6 is your sweet spot for an f2.8 lens.
How about coming down from closed? So from
Closed?
F22.
Well, that's just, you're looking for one sweet spot, that's
Okay.
it. So 2 stops down is typically the sweetest spot of any lens.
And there's no absolutes anymore. It
Yeah, that's
depends.
true.
It depends.
Yeah.
But you know, you're going to want more depth of field depending on the sensor. For example, on my cameras, I can shoot at 4 or 5.6. On a D800, you may need to be at f8 or f11 if you want to get the depth of field you're looking for. Or
I find my 24 to 70 at f22 at 24 millimeters is still razor sharp with no chromatic aberrations. So
okay, yeah,
you got, again,
it depends.
try your gear,
Right, try your
try
gear.
it out and figure it out what's going to work.
I can tell you a funny story about that. I've got a whole folder of images of this one wall of my house, which is right outside of my studio door. And whenever I get a piece of glass in to test, you know, I'm out there taking pictures, and my wife will walk by looking at, you shot the house again? What? Why? I mean, it's you got to practice with it. You got to learn what your equipment will do.
Question for you, Mark, specifically. Somebody asked a question about your dad.
Yes.
Is he still shooting 4x5 anymore?
Negative.
Okay.
He is not shooting 4x5. In fact, he has a little Lumix Panasonic camera that's kind of like an advanced point and shoot. I think he just got to the point where we figure he had spent about 6 years of his life in a changing bag, changing holders.
Wow.
So,
Oh my God.
you know, we have over 2.5 million 4x5 transparencies, of which some we scanned, but he was in the changing bag.
For those of you guys that
1.5
don't know,
million?
Marc's dad,
David Muench.
David, actually, I don't think I told you this, Mark, but he was one of my inspirations as a youngster to get into landscape photography. With the books that he had out, his images really inspired me, and one of the things that really I wanted to emulate as I was growing up. So he comes from a line; it's in his DNA.
It's fun to have David on a workshop. I'll tell a quick story. He's been
Yeah.
with us at Glacier in the last month, and also in Utah. He was there with us, and we've had him on a number of trips. We have a group, let's say it's 10 people, and a few of us are over here, and there's a bunch over there. And he's working with the group right here, you know, real detail, and all of a sudden he'll pick his head up and look over there, and you're doing it wrong, you know, from 100 meters away.
Yeah.
You know,
He knows.
He knows exactly where that guy 100 meters away should be positioned and relative to the scene that he's in. And you only get that from decades and
Experience,
decades of
yeah.
experience.
That's one of the advantages of going on a workshop. If you guys have never been on one, we all teach them. We've all been on them. I've been out with Rick a handful of times. You get to see different points of view, and you learn from your students as well, because someone will present a point of view or see something that you just didn't
Absolutely.
see. So you get to hang out with other photographers. You see what they're doing. You talk to each other, and that's one of the greatest ways to learn, by seeing what other people do. That you would never have thought of.
Especially the students, you know. At the end of the
yeah.
workshops, we do a slideshow. And I said, oh my gosh, these people who are not into it that long, who are full-time doctors or truck drivers or
Big day
whatever,
job,
right? Amazing work.
Yeah, there's nothing stopping you from.
Yeah.
That's one of the things about photography. It's very democratic. You don't have to have the
Yep.
most expensive gear
Right.
to get a killer image.
Absolutely not.
And having that concept and being able to see is more important than anything else. I think Ansel Adams said there's nothing more boring than a sharp photo of a fuzzy concept.
Yes, he did say
That
that.
sums it up.
So you don't have to have the greatest gear. I've seen you get pictures with your iPhone.
Occasionally.
Occasionally, it's not the camera. It helps when you're going to go real big, but beyond that, it's the seeing and capturing the emotion of the scene. Guys, we're just about out of time. Hard to believe.
Oh,
Just one technical question. Someone asked about color checker. Actually, two things. One, do they fade? Do you get oil on them? These aren't printed. This is actually kind of like a paint. So these will last a pretty good time. And it is a hard case, so do keep it closed, because like anything color hit with light, it will fade. And no, don't pour your coffee on it. Don't put your fingers all over the things, because yes, it's going to change color and you're going to need a new one. So yeah, if you replace it every year or a couple of years, you'll probably be in pretty good shape. We talked about monitor calibration again. we're just talking, kind of touching on that it's important to the process. If you want to learn more about it, then join us over the following few weeks. We'll explore it in the ultimate detail. But what I want to finish up with you guys is kind of your overview. Why do you do it? What do you want to share with someone else when you're out photographing? And I don't know, Rick, why don't we start with you?
I just think it's so rewarding, you know, you work hard to get a picture, it's, you know, I'm not an artist, I can't paint, you know, but you get a good picture, I think the rewards are definitely worth the effort that you put in, and the more you put in, the more you get out, and sharing a picture like on Google Plus or Facebook, or share a video like you did a little earlier, I think the sharing stuff, we're all involved in this awesome community of creative people that, I mean, and I think learning, we're always learning.
Sure.
And the Buddhists say learning is health, so. And I've learned from you guys today, and I always learn from you, so. I'm very happy to be here, so thanks for
Always
having
good
us.
to have you, Rick. Mark?
Good learning. I second that motion. You have to keep an open mind to keep learning, because otherwise, once you shut it off, right, then you might as well go backwards. But you really, you know, the rewarding part is what you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. And oftentimes, the critiques are that critical moment where if you don't want to be critiqued, you're really not opening your mind up. So I always tell people, be willing to accept criticism, because it's going to help you grow. And when that moment comes where you are accepted and your work is accepted, it's worth 10 times the weight of gold. So be critiqued and
Andy?
enjoy it as well.
For me, it's when somebody has that aha moment. You know, last week we're out there at 11 o'clock at night shooting stars, and the camera's going for 30 seconds. This person had never done it before in their life. And so we had the camera all set, push the button. 30 seconds later, they're looking at the back of their screen and they're going, oh my gosh, you know, and they get such a big smile and they're like, I did that. For me, that keeps me going month after month.
That is
all
great
sorts
to
of
be able to
places
share
around
that.
the world.
Yeah, it's almost like your children, you know, doing
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
great. But we all have that passion. Obviously, we all have that passion for the landscape and nature, or we wouldn't do it. So whatever your passion is, follow it and concentrate on it and learn it, because it brings back. And when we share with other people, especially when they have that aha moment. I had a couple of students do the same thing. And it's so gratifying that you're able to share that passion, and now they've gotten past through the roadblock
Right.
of having their gear in the way. Now they can actually start to explore and capture these beautiful images. And we can't all get to everywhere on the planet, so our way of visiting these places is from what everyone else is doing.
Sure.
So that's a great part of the photography. So let's sum up, because we've got like 2 minutes left. So, going back to the beginning, first, know where you're planning to go.
Yep.
Planning.
So you want to make sure that the place you're going to, you
Yep.
know what's there, you know the environment, you know the light, maybe some subject matter, sight lines, that kind of thing. Anything to add to
Have a
that?
contact at the location, maybe.
Yeah, if you've never been there
Guide.
before yourself, get a guide.
Backup plan.
A backup, oh, yes, and in
And
Rick's
plan B.
case, where he got locked out of
All the
two national parks. and
Three.
what, 3? What was the third one?
Hey, it was Bryce Zion
Oh, Bryce,
and
oh.
Arches.
Okay, so, yeah,
Anticipating what might happen. I think was the next
Government
thing.
shutdown.
government, yeah, we didn't anticipate that, but anticipating not only that, having a plan B, but anticipate for possible opportunities that might present themselves. So that'd be the next spot. Both, you got, all three of you guys mentioned about staying focused on the image. How do you mean, like, how do you keep from being distracted by everything that's going
I think
on?
the first thing you should do, and people don't do this until I suggest, turn off your cell phones. Now, you can't be out there checking your email and doing all this other stuff. You want to workshop, you're totally immersed, and that's one of the cool things about you're in this little community there. And don't turn on the news. When I travel, I never turn on the news, right? I'm not on CNN on the computer.
Yeah.
So I'm totally focused on bringing back, maybe wherever I go, I know you guys don't want to bring back 15,000 images. If you get 6 or 8 or 10 pictures, you're probably happy.
Andy?
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Be ready for serendipity when it happens. You could be taking a hike or driving in your vehicle, and all of a sudden the light comes together and the river is reflecting and the jumping orcas are coming and the rainbows are out. You've got to be light, you got to be nimble, you got to be quick, you got to know your camera, you have to have your camera ready and get out there and be that 30-second rule.
I call those photographic emergencies.
Yeah.
I'll slam the brakes, pull off the side of the road, jump out of the car. Fortunately for me, I'm married to a photographer. I don't know how easy it is for you guys. Well, I know your wife. Color workflow. You guys all use it. You're all using the color checker. You guys are calibrating your monitors. Do you do your own printing? You
I
guys?
do.
I print at Bay Photo, I don't do my own anymore.
Okay.
Did plenty of it, but
Mark, you are doing some of yours? Okay, Rick, I know
Well,
you.
you-
whether
do
you
it.
do your own or you send out to a lab,
You
you
should
still
know
gotta
about
be,
it.
you still gotta be calibrated.
Absolutely. And we take it one step
Right.
further, where we'll create custom profiles
Right.
for our printers, so
Yeah.
that we know that's gonna happen. So you've got a gear out of the way. You've learned the gear, you've shared how to learn the gear. That allows that serendipity. That allows you to get that shot right at the last second. And
Know your subject.
know
Yeah.
you. Yeah, I could tell a story about that as well. Just real quickly, I had the opportunity to go to the Olympic Training Center a couple years ago in Colorado Springs, and they were doing some swimming competitions. I'm not a sports photographer, and there were people there that did it for a living. I got the most horrendously boring shots you can imagine doing this, and the same people standing next to me were getting
Yeah.
these spectacular shots. So, yes, know your subject. And for me, for landscapes, the thing I always ask my students when I come up to them, and you've probably seen this as well, everybody gets there, they just want to start shooting.
Yeah.
They're not even, they're
Oh,
just,
yeah.
they're just going like this all over
We
the
call it the
place.
warthog effect in Africa.
Okay.
The first
Well-
warthog is shot.
I just tell them, go ahead, get it out of your system. Give them a couple of minutes to click away and then say, okay, why are you taking this picture?
Right.
What do you want to share? Do some cropping in camera, isolate. So that's, we all agree.
Yep.
But this is fun stuff though, isn't it?
You bet.
What could
Love
be
it.
more fun?
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Except
Talking
shooting,
shop.
except shooting the Croton Dam tonight in
Yep.
the dark and having sushi before.
That's
Sushi
fun
before
too.
was a good
That's the
idea.
plan tonight. We'll all be at the sushi dam. We'll all be at the Croton Dam tonight shooting stars and the dam in the moonlight. So we'll see how that works out. Hey guys, we're out of time. Andy,
Thank you very much.
pleasure. Mark,
Thank you.
Rick, as always, my
Okay,
friend. Thank you guys so much for coming in
Thank you.
and joining
And thank
us.
you.
And thank you
For
guys.
watching.
Thank you guys for joining us. Thanks to X-Rite for sponsoring us today. Thank you for your time and expertise. As I mentioned, we're going to be exploring color in detail over the next few weeks. We're going to talk about monitor calibration, camera calibration, printer calibration, and even take it to the extreme level in about 3 weeks. So stay tuned. We'll send out all the details in an email, so check your inbox for that announcement. So again, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for your great questions. You may have had more questions than we were able to get to. In our follow-up, we'll send you an email address that you can send those questions to. And I'm sure you've all heard tips that you can all use in your on your next photographic journey. So take advantage, think about what you've heard, and put it to practice. So until next time, keep exploring, keep shooting, and of course, have fun.
Gotta have
This is
fun.
a fun stuff. So thank you all again. See you online again soon. Until then, be well. Bye-bye.